I want to get right to Rick Newman, who continues to follow the race to the presidency. Rick, I almost forgot about this, but it's supposed to happen in November, and former Vice President Joe Biden is speaking out.
Yeah, he's still at it. He's got a TV studio in his basement, apparently, and he's doing some interviews. So somebody asked him, what's going to happen to the Democratic convention? Is this thing actually going to take place? And he said, I doubt it. And he's speaking the truth. I mean, look, the Olympics were canceled for right around the same time. You'd be cramming, 50,000 people into an arena and putting them in hotel rooms up in Milwaukee. And Biden said, I just don't think that's going to happen. So there are no procedures in the Democratic National Committee for what to do if you can't hold your convention. So they would actually have to develop those procedures, figure out how to do the voting remotely and things like that. But they are probably just going to have to do it, Brian.
What about Bernie Sanders, Rick? We haven't heard a lot about him, but he is still in this race, isn't he?
Yep, he's still in the race. And that actually complicates things a little bit with regard to what the Democrats might do regarding their convention. If Bernie Sanders were out of it and this were a cakewalk for Joe Biden, that would remove concerns about things such as what if you don't resolve the nominee, determine who the nominee is on the first vote, then that's when you go to that second vote with the superdelegates, and it's a complicated process, but much easier to do in person than to do remotely. So with Bernie Sanders still in the race, I mean, and Joe Biden not having a lock on it, the Democrats might have to figure out not only how do we do, the first vote, but what if we don't actually come to a decision on the first vote? Then we have to figure out how to do the second vote. It just gets more complicated. Again, this is doable, but let's not forget how badly the Democrats screwed up the Iowa caucus with the technology problems there. So I think there probably are concerns. Let's not have another technology fiasco here.
Rick, is Joe Biden getting any closer to selecting his running mate?
Who knows? I mean, I would imagine my best guess, Brian, is he knows who he wants to ask. I mean, it's a fairly short list of candidates when you say it's going to be a woman, and it probably needs to be a prominent woman. So we know the short list. It's Kamala Harris, the senator from California. Could be Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota. That might make a little bit more sense because Minnesota a little bit more in play for Democrats than California is. And there are a couple others. It could be somebody we're not expecting. But the point of a convention is it's really political theater, and it gets it gets primetime TV coverage. So it's a lot of free publicity for the candidate, and if they don't have a convention, they're not going to get that free publicity. Usually there's a thing known as a convention bump. And once the convention is over, the nominee, who is freshly crowned at that point, gets a little rise in the polls. So I'm sure they have to figure out the process for having these votes, but they also have to figure out how to make up for the lost publicity they're going to get. So you'd want to have a big bang with, a flashy vice presidential nominee, but they, going to have to figure out a different way to do that too.
Hey, Rick, I know President Trump's approval rating has actually ticked up throughout this pandemic. Do you think at the end of the day that this is going to be a referendum on his presidency? And, is it looking more likely or less likely that he may win because of this?
Absolutely. It's going to be a referendum on Trump, and not so much on his presidency as how well he handles this coronavirus, the pandemic, and also the severe recession we're going to have. This could go in so many different ways, Alexis, as you and I have discussed on our podcast. But it really depends on whether Americans feel like Trump is competent and he is getting the nation through a really difficult time, or if he's kind of fumbling around and people really start to struggle and they don't feel like they're getting any help from Washington. So, voters go both ways on this. I mean, they kicked out Herbert Hoover in 1932. So they did change horses in midstream. So that old adage, you're in a crisis, you want to stick with the guy who brought you there. Maybe not so true. And one thing about that little a bump in approval ratings that Trump got, that is puny compared to the bump in approval ratings we're seeing in Europe for Boris Johnson in the UK, for Emmanuel Macron in France, and Angela Merkel and Germany, even Justin Trudeau north of the border in Canada. They're all getting much bigger increases in their approval ratings than Trump is, in some cases double digits. And Trump's really is only 2 or 3 points at this point. So Americans kind of not, sure what to make of it yet.
All right, Rick. I want you to wear that bow tie the next time we do a podcast, okay? I feel a little slighted,
Sure.
I have to say. You mentioned our podcast. It's called Electionomics. Everybody, I know we have a little more time on our hands now at home. Be sure to check it out at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks a lot, Rick.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.